Morning, everyone. Welcome to Bible study here at All Saints Lutheran Church. This is the Bible study for this coming Sunday, August 30th, the 13th Sunday after Pentecost. We're just trekking through the Sundays after Pentecost at this point. My name is Pastor Tanner. I'm here with Pastor Jules and our intern, Vicar John from Luther Seminary. Both of them all of us apparently coming from the Northwoods, although this is just my backyard in Hastings. And Jules, I'm pretty sure that's just a background.
It is a background, but if I could, I would be on a paddleboard right where this is positioned, and that's a view of the Berkstad family cabin on Rush Lake.
That's a view of my potato patch.
Ooh!
John is the only one who's actually in the Northwoods, and he's sitting in a darkened room. So
I should move.
Riddle me that, but there you go. Today's texts are from Jeremiah chapter 15, Psalm 26, and we're doing a continuation of Matthew chapter 16. So we're going to start with Jeremiah. Pastor, you want to throw us what you got?
Yes. This is the preface from Sundays and Seasons, which is what we use for the Revised Common Lectionary for the introduction to the worship service, as well as to each of the texts. And it reads, Jeremiah's delight in the word of the Lord is contradicted by the heaviness of God's hand upon him and God's seeming unfaithfulness. God's tough love to Jeremiah says that if he repents, he will be allowed to continue in his strenuous ministry. Jeremiah is strengthened by the simple words, quote, I am with you, unquote. The text reads, O Lord, remember me and visit me and bring down retribution for me on my persecutors. In your forbearance, do not take me away. Know that on your account I suffer insult. Your words were found and I ate them, and your words became to me a joy and the delight of my heart, for I am called by your name, O Lord, God of hosts. I did not sit in the company of merrymakers, nor did I rejoice under the weight of your hand. I sat alone, for you had filled me with indignation. Why is my pain unceasing, my wound incurable, refusing to be healed? Truly, you are to me like a deceitful brook, like waters that fail. Therefore, thus says the Lord, if you turn back, I will take you back, and you shall stand before me. If you utter what is precious and not what is worthless, you shall serve my mouth. If it is they who will turn to you, not you who will turn to them, and I will make you to this people a fortified wall of bronze. They will fight against you, but they shall not prevail over you. For I am with you to save you and to deliver you, says the Lord. I will deliver you out of the hand of the wicked and redeem you from the grasp of the ruthless. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah, so a little bit of background on this. It's going to be shared by Pastor Tanner in a minute. Elfonetta Wines is senior pastor of Union Memorial, United Methodist Church in Coolidge, Texas, and she did a very good approach to this conversation, and I'd like to read just one paragraph of what she had to say. Jeremiah's words confirm that ministry is not an easy job. Ministry is not simply one task after another. Rather, the work of ministry touches the core of a minister's being. While Jeremiah's words may be surprising to the casual reader, ministers know that Jeremiah's words are not empty words. Jeremiah's words speak of wish that sometimes accompanies life in church leadership, and not just church life, but many times in life in general as well. And I think it is important for all of us to note that ministry is not an easy job for everyone. We're not talking about just Christian public leaders. We're talking about everybody who calls themselves a Christian are in a position of leadership, and it is hard work to be a part of ministry. I was reminded yesterday in a meeting that I had that the definition of ministry, at least by my standards, are show up and shut up, or share the gospel always. When necessary, use words, as St. Francis of Assisi once said. Show up, do good, be kind. But it's hard work, and it takes tenacity, and sometimes it feels like, yeah, as you say.
Yeah.
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 Is that the Yiddish version of ugh?
I think it's the farmer version. I don't know. I think that it's an interesting text though, especially in the time that we're in right now. I mean, like you said, it's not just Christian public leaders in terms of pastors and ministers and vicars and interns and things like that. It's everyone who's dealing with the times that we're in right now. But for Jeremiah specifically, thinking about being called by God to that specific ministry, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen a lot of posts from fellow clergy and ministers recently, just kind of lamenting the time that we're in and trying to come to terms with what it's like to live out our call in a way that we were never meant to, thought about, or trained to live out our call. And I think that's, I mean, the first 4 verses, 15 through 18 of this text are Jeremiah talking, and then the last few verses are God talking. But Jeremiah's conversation is all about like, God, you've called me to this. I'm supposed to do this. I know that I'm supposed to do this. I took your words. I put them in my mouth. I spoke them to the world. I'm doing all the things, but nobody's listening to me, and I hate it. Like, I won't go to parties. I don't hang out with people because everybody's dumb and nobody listens to me. I mean, he calls it indignation, but I think that's really what the translation is supposed to be. Like, everybody is really pissing me off right now because they won't listen to what I have to say that you have told me to tell them. Like, I feel that on a very, very deep spiritual level sometimes. I'm sure there are some parents who are watching who can also probably recognize and feel some of those emotions as well. But the promise is God, right? God saying like, it's okay, like I'm with you always. And that's the reassurance in the midst of that. But I don't know.
I think it's important for people to understand that there are times in our lives where we have acute situational anxiety, and just to be able to name it for what it is, like this too is going to pass. It just feels like it's chronic because it's been going on for so long. And if we can take a deep breath and take it one day at a time and do some really good self-care stuff. And I know I sound like a broken gong on this whole thing, but what I've been noticing, particularly around clergy and having conversation with clergy that are absolutely fried right now, it's because they're not taking time like I did last week, sitting on a paddleboard in the middle of this lake. You know, like you're going to have next week with sitting in a, I don't know where you're going, but you're recreating and getting off the screen. And John, you take a break and you go for a ride on your mountain bike or go out into the middle of the lake and catch some fish. There's got to be a deeper level of reboot that we have to acquire during this time of societal regression, and also all the screens. We have way too many screens going on in our lives, and some people will say, well, I can't set it down. And I was just talking to a neighbor of mine, and I'm like, if you don't set it down, you will die. Like, you cannot work 24/7 all the dang time. You just cannot. It is not good for your soul. I also said, I don't think you would have survived a week up at the family cabin because there's no reception. There's like no way to get on a screen. And you have to just be with yourself. So
Yeah. There are also, though, I mean, speaking as the millennial in the Zoom chat, there are generational differences in that too. I mean, the Zoomer generation, Gen Z behind me, were raised on screens in a way that my parents' generation certainly wasn't, in such a way that they have come to function. I mean, that's what they use to function in the world, right? And my generation, to some extent, uses screens significantly more than probably the two of your generations use it as well. And it's not just a way to sit and look at things and work on sort of thing, but it's also a way that we've stayed socially connected, in a way that's become very part of our kind of cultural ethos too. And so I think that there are ways to unplug that aren't just about the screens too. I mean, like, I think it's important to walk away from them every once in a while, but at the same time, I can sit in front of my screens all day long and be exhausted at the end of the day because of what I'm doing, or I can sit in front of the screens all day long and be really rejuvenated. It just depends on what I'm doing with the screen at the time, whatever's in front of me. Binge watching season 3 of Gilmore Girls while playing Angry Birds on my phone is really rejuvenating to me sometimes. But like I said, it depends on what it is that I'm doing with the screen at the time, and how we're using it, and how we set aside time to find that peace. I mean, I know a lot of people that use their screens to do meditation with, in ways that they wouldn't be able to do it, and connect with people that they wouldn't be able to connect with. And I think that can be rejuvenating as well.
Point taken. Point taken.
Get off my lawn. I just think that's important. Also, you keep saying this too shall pass, and now continuing our theme of random bands that we picked up last week with, was it Petro?
Oh yeah, Petra.
Whatever. Have you ever heard This Too Shall Pass by OK Go?
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh, you need to watch it. I highly encourage all of you to look up the YouTube video for OK Go, This Too Shall Pass. There are 2 different videos. One of them has a Rube Goldberg machine, which is excellent, which is one of the machines where like you push something at the beginning and it like goes through the entire room, and each reaction sets off another reaction, which sets off another reaction, and excellent. And the other one involves a marching band, which is also excellent. And I highly recommend that you take 10 minutes out of your day right now and go and watch both of those videos.
After the video.
They will, yeah, well, after this video, of course, yeah. Be on your screen constantly. That's what Pastor Jules is trying to tell you today. Thank you for joining us on this screen, and then move on to another screen, and then do another screen and another screen after that.
Better yet, go get some ice cream. Actually, I think you brought that up a while ago, that OK Go, This Too Shall Pass. I think that came up in a Bible study like probably a year ago. Because it's one of your go-tos.
I do. I watch those videos an incredible amount.
I fell into the whole of the Netflix Troll Hunter.
I just watched the whole thing.
It's so good.
There are like,
it's so good.
There's 3 different things you have to watch.
I know. I can't wait. Well,
very exciting.
My neighbor told me I had to watch Troll before I watched the next one about Merlin. I was like, what? I'm already halfway through that. And he goes, it won't make any sense. You got to go back to Troll Hunter.
You have to watch.
So I did. When I was painting my wall, I watched Troll Hunter last night. It was great. I have a green screen now as a wall.
Very exciting.
All right.
Okay, I have one more thing to add to the actual Jeremiah text, and that's from one of the people that I was reading this week is a professor named C.L. Crouch. She's an Old Testament professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, and her just closing paragraph and her commentary was beautiful. And so what she wrote was, Jeremiah's struggles speak to us today more than ever. Then, as now, the powerful sought to silence those who champion God's vision of a more just society. Those who speak out on behalf of the poor, the homeless, the disabled, the displaced, those who are suffering, those whose suffering is a living condemnation of our original sin, which, by the way, that phrase right there, anyway. Surrounded by ignorance and opposition, the dream of a society ruled by God's justice, righteousness, and steadfast love appears deferred, even impossible. In the face of exhaustion and despair, God affirms the work must go on. Everything is at stake. I am with you. I love that. I thought that was great. Like, I mean, the whole commentary was beautiful, but just that idea of like sometimes the world sucks and is trying to bring us down, and get in the way of our call to discipleship, but you got to keep going. Like, that's the call. Even in the midst of the suckiness, you got to keep going. And that phrase about the injustice in the world being a living condemnation of our original sin, I thought that was just perfect, especially considering some of the conversations that we've had around the Augsburg Confession recently and original sin, which if you haven't watched those videos, I highly recommend that you sit in front of your screen and watch them a little bit because they're great.
Let's kick it over to Vicar John, and he can maybe do a brief summary of original sin, because it's, I'm sure, right still on the tip of his tongue. Because not everybody is going to sit in front of their screen and watch the Book of Concord conversation of the Augsburg Confessions.
I don't know why. It's delightful.
It is delightful, and I highly recommend it. If you need something to get to sleep to at night, or if you just want to like increase your lifelong learning of the Lutheran understanding. So, Vicar John, what is original sin again?
Well, it's our separateness from God, right? I mean, it's oh boy, how do you do original sin in less than 500 words, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say go back to the video, watch the video.
Right there.
I was just trying to help. Just trying to help. Do you have a gospel lesson or a psalm that's going to be paired with this, Pastor Tanner?
I do have a psalm. John, do you have anything to say about the psalm today?
I do, sure. Do you want me to read the psalm?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, the psalm is Psalm 26, verses 1 through 8. And I'll read those right now. Let's see. Give judgment for me, O Lord, for I have lived with integrity. I have trusted in the Lord and have not faltered. Test me, O Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and my mind. For your steadfast love is before my eyes. I have walked faithfully with you. I have not sat with the worthless, nor do I consort with the deceitful. I have hated the company of evildoers. I will not sit down with the wicked. I will wash my hands in innocence, O Lord, that I may go in procession round your altar, singing aloud a song of thanksgiving and recounting all your wonderful deeds. Lord, I love the place in which you dwell and the place where your glory abides. And that's the psalm for today. And actually the verse really that stuck out for me today was verse 3. For your steadfast love is before me. I have walked faithfully with you. I love that verse.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when I hear that verse, I just try to, I guess the question in my mind was, what does it mean to walk faithfully with God? What does it mean to walk in integrity and faithfulness? And I think that was kind of the question that really stuck out with me. What makes us right with God? Does, avoiding those who are doing wrong, does that make us right with God? As what's in this psalm, or what does that mean? Walking with integrity, or walking with God, because we see even in the Old Testament, even in the beginning of the Old Testament, we see God walking with us in the garden. God walking with his people. So I just, I really, over and over again, I'm just trying to, in my mind, what does that mean? And I think for all of us, what does that mean, walking with God? What does it mean, walking with integrity? So I guess that was really the big question for me. And really it leads into our gospel lesson too. I mean, our gospel lesson, Jesus is saying, follow me, walk with me. And what does that mean? So, I mean, I guess I'll just throw that out there for you two as well.
My mind immediately goes to Psalm 139. I used to hear that as more of a accusatory sort of tone of voice. And then my friend Bill Aratinji, I had to memorize it for some work over at LSTC that I was doing. And he took my phone and he made a voice memo of it. And everybody else in the house was sleeping. So he went into the garage and he whispered it. And I would listen to it over and over again to try to memorize it. And where can I go from you? You know, it was that sort of, if I go to this dark place, you're there. If I go to this other place, you're there. Even the darkness is not dark to you, you know, but this real tenderness that came to it. And it gave me such a different understanding of what it means to have God walk alongside with us, to abide with us, to be present with us in a new and remarkable way. It just blew my mind how differently I saw that whole something. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. You know, just these really, it was such a tender rendering. And it'll probably always stick with me because every time I think about phrases like that, your steadfast love is before my eyes, I think about that same kind of language where God is before us, God is behind us, God is beside us, God is within us. That sense of we are so never alone. And I think in a society that's experiencing a high level of anxiety right now, I think it's a really good word and a good reminder for us to go, we're not alone. We're not alone in this. It's hard. As Tanner said, it's really hard. It's uncomfortable and there's many things going on, but take a deep breath, breathe in the Holy Spirit, center yourself, and trust that God is with you, even in the midst of whatever you're going through.
Absolutely. Promise in Jeremiah, it's the promise in the Psalm, it's the promise here that we're going to get in the gospel too. So I'm with you. Awesome. Should we move on to the gospel?
Please.
Awesome. This is Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 28. So you can get to that as I read the intro. After Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, Jesus reveals the ultimate purpose of his ministry. These words prove hard to accept, even for a disciple whom Jesus has called the Rock. So those of you following along at home, this is immediately following Pastor Jules' sermon and gospel text from last week. So Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," right? And Jesus says, "You are awesome, Simon, Bar-Jonah, Rock, Church, etc., etc., etc." It's all very nice. And right after that is where we pick up the gospel today, Matthew 16, 21 through 28. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain their whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." The gospel of the Lord. So, I like this passage a lot. I used to like it because I thought that it was really cool that Jesus was yelling at somebody. And when I was a kid, I just remember thinking like, oh, good. Like the disciples got yelled at too. That's nice. Jesus does a lot of yelling at the disciples in the Gospel of Matthew though. So the Matthew year was always really good for me when I was a kid. But basically, what we've got going on here is Jesus is kind of moving in this moment from the first few chapters of Matthew, which were all about healing and casting out demons and preaching and teaching and talking about love and hope and the kingdom of God and fish and bread and all those sorts of wonderful things. And he's moving now into this conversation about his death, right? In some of the gospels, this big turn comes right after the transfiguration. In Matthew's gospel, it becomes really apparent right here that after the disciples say, Jesus, this is who you are, Jesus says, great, and this is what that means, sort of thing. But as we read, Jesus talking about his death doesn't go over very well, which I don't know about the two of you, but that makes sense to me. I mean, if I'm a disciple and I've been cruising around following Jesus for years and years and years, and we've got these plans and these thoughts and this idea about ministry and a following that is 5,000 plus many others strong just in one, county, like that seems like it's a good thing that we got going here. And so for Jesus to suddenly say, oh, and by the way, the next step is to die. Let's get going. I mean, I understand, and I imagine that this isn't just Peter coming, right? This is the disciples all getting together and going, holy crap, what the heck is Jesus talking about? And sending Peter off to Jesus and saying, like, go and talk him off the ledge quickly, because this is a bad idea, sort of thing. I mean, like they have seen that people don't like Jesus, especially those who are rich and powerful and the religious leaders of the day, et cetera, et cetera. Like they know that it's dangerous to go to Jerusalem and that Jesus's life is at risk. So to, poke the bull, so to speak, is not like a great plan. And they get that, which I think is, reasonable, right? I don't know. I think that's reasonable. So then we get this beautiful language, this yelling, right? Get ye behind me, Satan. And I think that it's important to remember here that when Jesus is talking about Satan, Jesus is not talking about a medieval Christian understanding of Satan, with the horns and the tail and the pitchfork, right? Like that is not what we are talking about here. We are not talking about the yin to God's yang. We're not talking about the evil to God's good. We're not talking about the heaven to God's or the hell to God's heaven. Like we're not talking about those sorts of things, right? We're talking about the Hebrew understanding of Satan, the Hasatan, which we have talked about repeatedly in Bible study, which is the tempter, right? And so that the tempter comes up earlier in the Gospels when Jesus is sent into the wilderness after the baptism, but the tempter also comes up throughout the Old Testament, especially in books like Job, where the Hasatan, the tempter, is not an evil being fighting against God, but is a member of God's heavenly court, right? Like one of God's beings who God sends out to tempt the faithful to make sure that they're ready for what God has in store for them, which you can like that or hate that, but that's the reality of what Scripture has to say. Like God sends the Hasatan to go out and tempt people to make sure that they're ready for what's next. And so Jesus looks at Peter in this text and treats him like this tempter of God and says, no, right? Like, now I'm not going to fall for that. I've got a path and I'm going to stick to it. So in a sense, like this text is about Jesus passing the test, the tempting test, again and again and again, because Jesus does that a lot. But then, because I'm a little bit, just a small bit of a Greek nerd, not very much, because I don't know it as well as Vicar John does, but I like the language that is used here when Jesus says, get behind me, because the language that he uses is opiso mu, opiso mu. And what it literally means is, get behind me, but also it's the same language that's used for follow me, like get in line behind me. So Jesus isn't just saying like, shame on you, go away, get away from me. He's saying, get in line behind me and keep following me. And then he expands upon that in the next paragraph and says, if you want to be my follower, then take up your cross and follow me. So it's not just a condemnation of Peter, it becomes this command to set aside your desires for what you think life and ministry should be and get in line behind me because I've got a plan and this is going to be the plan, whether you like it or not. Which is oddly enough basically what God said to Jeremiah. So, we get that and it's all very exciting. What do you think? Sorry, I'm rambling now.
That was powerful, Tanner. It was great. I was thinking about a song. I think it's by Grammar. Because in the text here it says, don't run from suffering, embrace it. This is the Message version of that same thing. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, in finding yourself, your true self. I Wish You Pain is a song by Grammar. And it's talking about really like, I don't want your life to be filled with butterflies and snowflakes and, just easy. I want you to lean into whatever the pain it is that you have so that you can embrace love more fully. I mean, it's that paradox thing. But I was also thinking about how we get the get behind me, Satan kind of thing. Like, that's what the whole premise of the Screw Tape Letters were, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this conversation piece, like in Job, it's more of this, it's the one that, we are in this place where we just want to blame somebody. And I grew up around a theology that was a little bit, maybe not specifically the church that I was raised in, but I heard people around me blaming Satan. Well, Satan made me do that or whatever. And it's like, yeah, no, you clearly made a choice. Yeah. But that's part of like offloading shame or hurt or whatever, is that displacement. You want to get it. Oh, it's somebody, I'm not going to take personal responsibility for that. And that's what you said a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Peter, is that every time that Jesus rebuked him or called him out or set him on a path of better understanding of what it means to be in right relationship, he was like, oh, see, now that's helpful.
Yeah.
He didn't run away.
Tuck that in the back of my head and pull that out again someday. Like, yeah.
He didn't bail. He didn't argue. He didn't criticize. He didn't, put the shields up. And he was the guy that would just lean into the suffering so that he could figure out what the next thing was. Because as a disciple of Christ, he wants to, as we'll hear in just a few minutes, be covered in the dust of the Rabbi Jesus. And what does that mean? It means I want to be like Christ. I want to emulate as we're going to talk about in a week from now, this idea of forgiveness and restoration. What does it mean to be in right relationship all the time? All this just like nicely ties together, I think. Restorative justice, right?
Yeah, it's coming right out of Jeremiah, too.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that there's wrong in the world, and it's usually because there are people who are making it be so. Fix it. Do that. Make that be better. Like again and again and again. That's God turning the world around. That's God, writing up everything like over and over again. So.
And it's not something that happens overnight. I think that's the thing. People have that idea of this instant gratification of quick fix, fast food, whatever. And it's like, we have to remember that the soul moves at a geological speed.
Yep. And
knowing that it moves at a geological speed means that change does take time, but it is solid change. It's not just something drifting in the wind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Vicar
John,
do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that he's telling Peter and the disciples here that I'm going to be killed and on the third day, I'm going to be raised. So why is it such a surprise when he's raised from the dead after 3 days? why can they lean into this negativity or this negative side, but don't hear the positive side of any of this? And weren't you just talking about that a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Jules, about how people tend to remember or hear the difficult stuff, but they don't tend to hear the positive stuff? I think that's just really interesting in this part of the story as well.
Well, they say that, I think this is universal. You can have, as pastors, I'll just use an example, standing by the door Sunday morning, shaking hands as people leave. Unfortunately, can't do that right now, but good sermon. Occasionally somebody will say, nice sermon, Pastor Tanner, and he didn't preach, which is, okay, it's fine. I don't mind that. And then one person will throw a little negative zing in there about something that they didn't like or some tiny little thing. And that's the thing that'll niggle all week. That's the thing that will drive us crazy all week. And why? Because it's about separation. But ultimately, it's not about separation in the sense that it's about sabotage, and people actually want to get closer to you by saying something that really ticked you off so that you go back to them again, which is something that we're going to talk about on September 6th. Conflict resolution.
Ooh.
Woohoo! That's the teaser to watch next week, to be a part of Bible study next week. But yeah, I think that we do have a tendency to focus on the negative aspects of things. And for me right now, I think it's super important that we fill our lives with goodness and grace and mercy and understanding and compassion and kindness, especially towards others, but also towards self. I think it needs to go both directions. Again, we're going to talk about that next week a little bit more. But if we do not do that hard work, all of this conversation around Black Lives Matter and being able to do some reconciliation work as a nation, as well as local states, around truth and reconciliation around Black Lives Matter, especially with the shooting of another Black man just 2, 3, 4 days ago, something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering his name right now, but it is, we're not done. We are not done with this, and our society is in a great level of regression, and we all, I think, could take a good long, hard look, and what does it mean for us to be covered in the dust of Rabbi Jesus? Like, what does that look like? Because, and I'll repeat myself next week, but 2/3 of all of the didactic preaching throughout the Gospels across the board are about forgiveness and restoration and restorative justice. 2/3, according to Richard Rohr. That's really telling to me. And probably the other third is about stewardship and how you're going to give back, which is something that people don't really want to talk about either. But how is it that you can give back in such a way that edifies the good gifts that God has given to us?
Yeah. And I mean, John, to your point though about how weird it is that they don't follow this later on. I mean, he says on the third day he will rise again, right? Mm-hmm. And you get into this tendency to think about how we focus on the bad instead of the good. But we also have to remember, I think, that crucifixion and the cross are not a metaphor. I mean, for us today, they can be a metaphor in a lot of ways. You're like, oh, the suffering and yada, yada, yada. And oh, yes, take up your cross. Woohoo! Yay, Jesus, right? But when Jesus said, take up your cross, he was talking to a people who had literally walked down the road out of Jerusalem and seen it lined with crosses from the empire of Rome killing dissidents, right? When Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me, this would have a moment here where the disciples would have been like, we need to reevaluate if this is a good idea to follow this guy. Because to take up your cross means that Jesus is saying you are going to die if you follow me. This isn't metaphorical. And the vast majority of the disciples did die very violent, painful martyr deaths because they followed Jesus, right? This isn't this isn't meant to be metaphorical for suffering. This is meant to be like, this is risky and dangerous, and you need to prepare yourself for it. And I think that it's perhaps possible that they heard the crucifixion part and kind of tuned out the rise again part, because that seems pretty outlandish and weird. But the get crucified because you're following me around thing is very, very possible, right? Ugh. Anyway, we're going to talk about that on Sunday a little bit too. But before we close out this study, what I want to do is I want to show you a video. According to Pastor Jules, many of you have probably seen this before, because I think she said that she's used it way back and back and back. All right, this is a video by a guy named Rob Bell, who was very popular when I was, I don't know, younger. I don't actually know what he does anymore. He'll still read things and he writes things and does lots of stuff. He's an interesting person.
He just came out with a brand new book.
He did, yeah. He's always writing, but for a while there, he put out a bunch of videos called Numa.
Yep, that was after Mars, after he left Mars in Michigan, which was like a big mega church, and then he just sort of crashed and burned because he didn't keep good boundaries and kind of got pulled into the whole, like what we were talking about before in ministry, how it can be a little overwhelming at times if you don't set good boundaries. And he wrote a book that we did, I think shortly after you got here, What is the Bible? Which is pretty fun. Is that the right title? What is the Bible?
Yep.
And then this last book, he's talking about spirituality. And Bell is an ELCA pastor who is like the message is to the NRSV and Bell is to Richard Rohr. That's kind of the comparison that I put.
So we're gonna watch a video that he put out called Dust.
I'm sorry. N.T. Wright, not Richard Rohr. Rob Bell is to N.T. Wright as the message is to the NRSV. Just had to clarify that.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm gonna mute now. I'll stop.
We're gonna watch a video called Dust, and that's how we're gonna close out study today. So we'll mute ourselves and let you watch this. Hopefully it will work, and they will let us. Vicar John will let me know and make sure that the sound is actually working as this starts.
Wait for the day. Company only. Sounds, it makes it worth it. Sound is hard to ace.
I want to be the kind of person who does the right thing. And I don't just mean the big things where right and wrong are obvious and easy, but I mean the small things, the subtle, unnoticed things, like helping my neighbor when she's shoveling a driveway. You know, what I do when no one's watching. Because it's so easy to let those small things slip away. And it's those endless choices that we make every day that shape us and the kinds of people that we are. But this has started to change for me recently because I've started to believe different things about myself. A friend of mine gave me insight into the story about Jesus and his disciples that I'd heard before, but it's just taken on a whole new meaning. Jesus' disciples are in a boat, and it's the middle of the night, and they're trying to get across the lake, and the wind is blowing, and it's getting choppy, and Jesus comes walking out to them on the water. Now they think he's a ghost. So they're like, Jesus, is it you? And he says, yes. And one of them, Peter, gets out of the boat and starts walking on the water towards Jesus. What is Peter thinking? And why Does he believe that he can walk on water? Now, what I've come to realize is the story makes way more sense if you understand the background. Jesus is a Jewish rabbi with Jewish disciples living in a first century Jewish world. Now, Jesus grew up in a region called the Galilee, and the Jewish people in the Galilee believed that God had spoken to Moses, one of their great historical leaders, and had given him the first 5 books of the Bible. They called these first 5 books the Torah. Torah means like teaching or instructions or simply the way. And so Torah was the center, the foundation of their lives, and it was the focus of their educational system. So most Jewish boys or girls around the age of 6 would go to school for the first time to learn the Torah. It'd probably be held in a local synagogue and be taught by a local Torah teacher who was a rabbi. This first level of education was called Beit Sefer and lasted until the kid was around 10 years old. In Beit Sefer, most kids would memorize the Torah and by the age of 10 have the Torah by heart, every word. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, memorized. Now, by the end of Beit Sefer, which would be around 10 years of age, most kids were no longer going to school. They were they were apprenticing, learning the family trade, learning the family business, learning how to manage a household. But the best of the best would keep going. They would continue their education into the next level, which was called Beit Talmud. In Beit Talmud, the best of the best who are still going on, the ones with the most natural ability, would memorize the rest of the Hebrew scriptures. Genesis through Malachi, memorized. Now, by the end of Beit Talmud, 14, 15, most kids are learning the family business, learning the family trade, apprenticing with their parents. But the best of the best of the best would continue on to the next level of education, which was called Beit Midrash. And they'd go to a rabbi and they'd apply to that rabbi to become one of that rabbi's disciples. Now, when we use the word disciple, we often mean student, but we generally mean somebody who knows what the teacher knows. But a disciple was something far deeper. A disciple just doesn't want to know what the rabbi knows. A disciple wants to be like the rabbi and wants to learn to do what the rabbi does. Now, rabbis differed in how they interpreted the Torah. They would take like a verse or a command, and one rabbi might say, well, this is what it means to follow this verse or to do this command of God. But another rabbi might say, no, I think it means something slightly different. And so different rabbis had different sets of interpretations about how they lived out and understood and interpreted the scriptures. Now, a rabbi's set of interpretations was called that rabbi's yoke. So when you went and applied to a rabbi to become one of that rabbi's disciples, what you wanted to do is you wanted to take that rabbi's yoke upon you so that you could learn to know what the rabbi knows in order to do what the rabbi does, in order to be like the rabbi. So you'd go to a rabbi and you'd say, Rabbi, I want to become one of your disciples. The rabbi would then grill you. The rabbi would ask you questions about Torah, questions about the prophets, questions about the oral tradition, because the rabbi wants to know, can this kid sit in front of me? Can this kid do what I do? Can this kid spread my yoke? Does this kid have what it takes? So the rabbi would fire off all these questions and grill the kid. And if the rabbi thought this kid's good, this kid loves God, loves Torah, but this kid isn't the best of the best of the best, the rabbi might say to the kid, you obviously love God and you obviously know the Torah, but you don't have what it takes to become one of my disciples. And so the rabbi might say something like, go and continue learning your family trade, continue plying your family trade. But if the rabbi thinks this kid has got it, I think this kid could do what I do, the rabbi would say to the kid, come, follow me. And so you would leave as this, 14, 15-year-old kid, you would leave your family, your friends, your synagogue, your village, and you would devote your entire life to being like your rabbi, learning to do what your rabbi does. This is what it means to be a disciple.
It's much the same.
So, a rabbi comes to town, a powerful rabbi, and he's got like his little pack of disciples with him, and they're doing everything they can to keep up with him because they've devoted their lives to doing what their rabbi does. So if you're a disciple, by the end of the day with your rabbi traveling on these hot, dusty, dirty roads, you've got whatever your rabbi stepped in just caked all over the front of you. And so this saying developed among the wise men and the sages. You would say to a disciple, you'd say, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. This is a scene that everybody'd seen this. They knew exactly what it meant to be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Now, all of this, to me, has huge implications for Jesus and how we understand Jesus, because most rabbis would begin their teaching around the age of 30. And in the Bible, around the age of 30, we have Jesus walking down the shore along the Sea of Galilee, and he comes across Peter and Andrew, and they're fishermen. And Jesus says to them, come, follow me. Well, if they're fishermen, and Jesus calls them to be his disciples, then they're not following another rabbi. And if they're not following another rabbi, they're not the best of the best. They didn't make the cut. Then the text continues. It says that at once they dropped their nets and followed him, which I've always thought is a bit strange. I mean, it's odd, isn't it? That they just drop them and go. And I don't, some of those Christian movies don't help, do they? I mean, it's like Jesus comes down the beach and he's in this white bathrobe and he has this light blue beauty pageant sash on, and his hair is blow dried and he's Swedish, and he calls the disciples and they're kind of these robots. They kind of come around and go after him. If you understand it, like in its original context, it starts to make perfect sense. I mean, rabbis were the most honored, respected, revered people anywhere. I mean, the best of the best of the best are the only ones who got to be rabbis. And this rabbi comes down the beach and says to you, come follow me. Well, what's he really saying? What he's really saying is, I think you could do what I do. I mean, he's saying you can be like me. Of course you drop your nets and follow him. And then the text even continues. It says that he comes across James and John, and they're fishing with their father Zebedee. Now, if they're fishing with their father, what are they? They're apprentices. They're learning the family business. And if he calls them to be his disciples, and they're not the disciples of some other rabbi. So James and John, they're not good enough. They didn't make the cut either. They aren't the best of the best. And how old are they? 15? 16? I mean, 20? These are not old men. They're young. I mean, Jesus chooses them because his movement is for everybody. I mean, it's for rich and for poor and for women and men and educated and uneducated. I mean, actually, what's one of the things they say about them later on? One of the things they say about them later on is, these guys are like unschooled fishermen. I mean, it's for the peasants and the scholars. It's like a movement of anybody's, and he calls them the JV, the B team, the not good enoughs. He calls them to be his disciples, and they change the course of human history. So back to the walking on water thing. You have this boat full of anybody's, and the water's choppy and the wind's blowing, and they're terrified because as Jesus comes across the water to them and they think he's a ghost. And then Peter says, well, if it's you, then tell me to come to you. Now, why is this Peter's first response? Why is Peter's first reaction? If it's you, then tell me to come to you. Because he's a disciple. I mean, he's oriented his whole life, devoted his whole life to doing what he sees his rabbi doing, learning to be like his rabbi. So he sees his rabbi walking on water, and what's the first thing he wants to do? I want to walk on water too. I want to be like my rabbi. And so Peter gets out of the boat, and he starts walking on the water, but he starts to sink, and he yells out, Jesus, save me. And the text reads that Jesus immediately caught him and said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, I always assumed that Peter doubts Jesus, but Jesus isn't thinking. Who does Peter doubt? Doubts himself. He loses faith in himself that he can actually be like his rabbi. I mean, Jesus wouldn't have called him if he didn't think he could be like him. Jesus even reminds his disciples of this at one point. He says to them, wait, you didn't choose me, I chose you. The rabbi doesn't choose you unless the rabbi thinks that you can do what he does, that you can be like him. I mean, all my life I've heard people talk about believing in God. But God believes in us, in you, in me. I mean, faith in Jesus is important. But what about Jesus? Faith in us. I mean, he must have faith in us because he leaves it all in the hands of these disciples. And what's the last thing Jesus says to them? He says to them, now you go and make more disciples. He leaves it all in the hands of these anybody's, and they do it. I mean, what if we can actually be the kinds of people that God created us to be? What if he actually believes that? I mean, what if he actually believes that we can be the kind of people who live like Jesus lived? And the kinds of people who take action because we're aware of all of these endless opportunities around us all the time for good, for beauty, for truth. I mean, Jesus has faith that you can follow him and you can be like him. He believes it. May you believe in God, but may you come to see that God believes in you. May you have faith in Jesus, but may you come to see that Jesus has faith that you can be like him. A person of love and compassion and truth. A person of forgiveness and peace and grace and joy and hope. And may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, Jesus.
All right. I love that video.
So good. So good. It was so fun watching you guys' face just grin, like nod and grin and nod and grin.
I'm struck now, like thinking about it. I had watched a little bit of it before Bible study, but I hadn't really been paying attention to Rob, and like I couldn't remember when that video was made. But then I looked at his hair, and I was like, frosted tips on a guy. It's got to be late '90s, early 2000s. Like I remember that. Those were good times. Still speaking to us today. God
Great
believes in
content.
Jeremiah, God believes in the psalmists and the disciples, and God believes in us.
Amen.
Follow me. All right. Thanks, everybody. That's all I got for today. So,
That was
good.
great.
If you have any questions or comments, throw them up in the feed there, and we'll get back to you. But otherwise, we'll see you on Sunday, everyone. So, hope you have a great and blessed day. Bye.
Bye.